Good afternoon, everyone. This is Bassam Haddad, and we are here with the project titled Gaza in Context, a collaborative teach-in series. This is session number 5, titled Anti-Semitism and Anti-Zionism. Today, we will be addressing a discussion on anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism and how the two have been conflated, especially in recent weeks, in light of the ongoing conflict. We have witnessed another night of horror last night with bombings of schools and hospitals. And we are here to discuss a broad topic that has been controversial. And I must say, it is less controversial in many parts of the world and more controversial in some parts, including where we are at right now, or most of us, which is the United States. We have with us a remarkable group of scholars and researchers that we are very proud and honored to have with us address this topic. We have Adam Horowitz, Shireen Seali, John Reynolds, and Shira Robinson. We will be taking about 75 minutes to 90 minutes to address this matter, where each speaker will speak for about 8 to 10 minutes. And then we will have a discussion. Your questions online will actually be fielded so long as we have time. And let me just say that this project is co-sponsored or co-organized, I should say, by 22 university research centers. And it is a project whose products or content you can find and access anytime at palestineincontext.org. Feel free to visit the site at any moment. We are now on our 5th session. We will have another session on Tuesday at 1 p.m. with Dr. Abahir Al-Saqqa from Palestine, addressing the social history of Gaza, and another on the media, and yet another on the various narratives that are addressed by Israel on the question of Palestine. And we will also be having another episode of the podcast, The War on Palestine, which will be featured this weekend. And we will also add this material or links here on the feed. Let me start by introducing our John, your screen is flickering. It's fine now. Let me start by introducing our first speaker, Shireen Seali, who is also part of this project. Shireen is Associate Professor of History at the University of California, Santa Barbara. She held the Qatar Postdoctoral Fellowship at Georgetown University and the European and the Europe in the Middle East Postdoctoral Fellowship at the, I don't know if I'm going to do this right, Wissenschaftskolleg zu Berlin. Seali was director of the Middle East Studies Center at the American University in Cairo, 2012 to 2014, where she was awarded an Excellence in Teaching Award in 2014. Shireen's Men of Capital, Scarcity, and Economy in Mandate Palestine out of Stanford Press in 2016 explores how Palestinian capitalists and British colonial officials used economy to shape territory, nationalism, the home, and the body. Her forthcoming book, From Baltimore to Beirut, on the question of Palestine, focuses on a Palestinian man who was at once a colonial officer and a colonized subject, an enslaver and a refugee. His trajectory from 19th century mobility across Baltimore and Sudan to 20th century immobility in Lebanon places the question of Palestine in a global history of race, capital, slavery, and dispossession. Seali is the recipient of the National Endowment for the Humanities Research Fellowship, the Distinguished Teaching Award from the Academic Senate, the University of California, Santa Barbara, the Harold J. Plouse Award at UCSB, and the UC President's Faculty Research Fellowship. She currently serves as co-editor of the Journal of Palestine Studies and co-founder and co-editor of Jadaliyya. We should start inviting less accomplished speakers so we can have shorter bios. Shireen, the floor is yours.
Yes, I'm sorry. I don't know why you got that long bio. Um, Good morning, everyone, or good morning from where I sit. I want to I want to thank, of course, ASI for bringing us together. And I want to just gesture to the numbers of Palestinian lives interrupted today. According to the Gaza Ministry of Health, those numbers are over 11,078 people. We've witnessed the horrific scenes of people struggling in their last painful breaths, their limbs and lives shattered on the streets, most recently of Shifa Hospital. We've witnessed as Israel bombs one hospital after another, hospitals that are spaces of refuge for the now 1 million people suffering internal displacement. This is day 35 of the latest iteration of the 100-year war on Palestine. What does the Palestinian struggle teach us about how to survive war, epistemological cleansing, definitely what we're talking about, ethnic cleansing, and genocide? It teaches us that the fragmentation of land parallels the multiple scales of racialization that Palestinians survive. It teaches us that the battle over land, remaining on it, holding it under our feet, parallels the battle over language. It teaches us that the conquest of land actually parallels the conquest of speech. We are here to insist that calling for a free Palestine is not racist, that we can say Palestine, that we can imagine a Palestine free geographically from the Mediterranean Sea to the Jordanian River without being called racist. The struggle against all forms of racism, anti-Semitism, Islamophobia, anti-Blackness, and xenophobia is central to the Palestinian demand for freedom. To equate anti-Zionism with anti-Semitism is to deny the history of both. Anti-Semitism is a 19th century outgrowth of Judeophobia, which has existed for as long as there have been Jews. During the Middle Ages, Judeophobia became the constitutive underbelly of the European Catholic Church and its claims to be a civilizing force. Later, European Protestant narratives that pitted self-made Christian masculinity in the empire against tropes of an intrinsically communal Jewish hold on capital. The precariousness of Jewish life began to recede in the 1700s with the Enlightenment, as Jews began to gain equal legal rights, at least in theory. The majority of the world's Jewish population at this time lived in Russia, where an autocratic monarchy not only continued to deny them civic equality, but incited deadly pogroms against them. Despite the Enlightenment's promises of rationality and equality, Jewish people remained one among a series of others, like colonized people, in relation to whom modern European racial ideas were shaped. Indeed, much Enlightenment thought was premised on a hierarchical understanding of humanity. During the 19th century, with a shifting world order, the category of race became a dominant way to establish this hierarchy through exclusion and scapegoating. Anti-Semitism racialized Jews as a biologically irredeemable, inassimilable other. This racialization paralleled and built on the racialization and violent exclusion of Black, brown, and colonized bodies. For Jews in Europe, it would lead to genocide under Nazi rule, itself an intensification of strategies used by the German military in colonial states in Central Africa, Namibia, and wars in China. Contrasted with this history of European anti Semitism, Zionism was a national political movement that began in the late 19th century, seeking a state for Jewish people. Zionism was neither the only Jewish response to anti Semitism, nor was it the most popular until the Nazi persecution of Jews in the 1930s. Zionism continued the Enlightenment's idealization of the nation states and its hierarchical understanding of humanity. It promised Jews that they could finally become European, but only by leaving Europe. For Zionists, Jewish claims to a piece of land are more legitimate than and outweigh those of the Palestinians who have resided on that land for hundreds of years. Palestinian freedom is a crucial step in ending the logic of racialization and civilizational hierarchy. Critiquing this logic is a moral responsibility for all of us in this moment and in every moment. Defending Palestinian rights, calling for a ceasefire, criticizing Israeli policy, and opposing anti Semitism are not mutually exclusive. In fact, they are wholly consistent positions to hold. Whether by drawing an analogy to the South African experience of apartheid or to the Native American experience of dispossession in Turtle Island, Palestine and its offerings are central to a broader historical struggle for social and racial justice. We have learned from various liberation struggles and traditions that no one is free until we are all free. That's it. See, I gave you a short presentation to
Thank
make up for
you.
my long bio.
Thank you very much, Shireen. Let me add myself. Thank you very much, Shireen, for this concise definition of very complicated matters. We will now move to Shira Robinson, and I will try to reduce the bios a little bit, if you don't mind. We have a couple of comments pestering me for reading the whole bio, and I agree with them because time is precious, as that one person said. Shira Robinson works on the social and cultural history of the modern Middle East with an emphasis on colonialism, citizenship, nationalism, and cultures of militarism after World War I. She joined George Washington University in 2007 after 2 years of teaching at the University of Iowa and 1 year as visiting fellow at the Davis Center for Historical Studies at Princeton University. She received her BA in Middle Eastern and North African Studies from the University of Michigan and her MA and PhD in History from Stanford University. Dr. Robinson's research has been funded through the Fulbright Institute, the Social Science Research Council, the Mellon Foundation, and the Palestinian American Research Center. We will of course, have all of these bios, and we do have them on Jadaliyya, and I will also make them available on PalestinianContext.org under the link for this session or for this teach-in. So please feel free to visit, and I'll add the URL to the screen shortly. Again, thank you, Shira, for joining us, and the floor is yours.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm very sorry to have to be a part of this conversation. Well, I'm sorry that all of these events have led to these webinars, but I think that they're really important. They're obviously crucial, and they're crucial to saving lives. So I want to start by talking about the ways in which the conflation of anti-Zionism with anti-Jewish racism dates back to the 1920s, and the fact that Palestinians have since that time borne the cost of European Judeophobia or anti-Semitism ever since. As Shireen explained, one of the founding premises of the Zionist movement is that European Jews had superior and later they argued exclusive rights to the land between the river and the sea. This was a political position, and anti-Zionism emerged as opposition to this political vision. From the 1920s until today, the Zionist leadership in Palestine, now Israel, has effectively weaponized the charge of anti-Semitism as a way to depoliticize this Palestinian opposition to the exclusive claims of Jews to the country. We know that the resounding Palestinian rejection of the 1947 partition resolution, for example, was rooted in the previous 7 decades of actual displacement and dispossession by Palestinian farmers from their lands and by Palestinian laborers from industry and the labor market in the urban setting. We know that from the 1960s through the 1990s, Israel equated the PLO chairman Yasser Arafat with Hitler. We know that in recent years, organizations like the ADL, the Anti-Defamation League in the United States, have effectively deployed a definition of anti-Jewish racism that includes criticism of Israeli state policies, criticism that is protected by, or until recently has been a protected it's been a protected speech under US law, and it has deployed this definition as a weapon against the nonviolent movement calling for boycott, divestments, and sanctions against Israel, or even just voices calling to end the occupation of the West Bank and Gaza Strip since 1967. We might recall that then Prime Minister and today's Prime Minister, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's outlandish claim a few years ago that Yasser Arafat gave Hitler the idea for the final solution against the Jewish people in the 1940s. And this claim, of course, was immediately that day debunked by Holocaust scholars. And the most recent example of this weaponization was the decision of Israel's delegate to the UN to wear a yellow Jewish star during a meeting of the General Assembly last week, in which he tried to use this symbol to equate Israel's unprecedented, indiscriminate, genocidal assault on the Palestinians in Gaza with the Allies' campaign to defeat the Axis powers. Once again, the head of the Yad Vashem Holocaust Memorial Center lacerated this Israeli delegate to the UN for this decision. There is no question that the resurgence of Judeophobia and Islamophobia in the United States and in Europe since 9/11, but especially since 2016, is real. And it is also true that the rise of documented hate crimes against Jews and Jewish institutions in the United States continues to be perpetuated overwhelmingly by white supremacists, not Palestinians or their allies. And if you read the fine print of the ADL statistics, which I did up until 3 days ago, ADL statistics bear this out. There is no doubt that anti-Semitism continues to poison our society and poses a threat to Jews worldwide, just as anti-Black racism poses a threat to brown and Black people worldwide. Over the years, anti-Semitism has surfaced within Arab and Palestinian nationalist circles, but it has never been the origin of the problem in Israel-Palestine. And when Judeo-phobic imagery, language, and stereotypes do come up today, we in the Palestinian Solidarity Movement must and do combat it. But we must not conflate passionate political opposition with hatred and demonization of an entire religion and an entire religious tradition. Not only is this a dangerous distraction from the heart of anti-Semitism and the ways we need to fight it where it exists, I would suggest very gently that it is also added to it by making it difficult for Jews of different perspectives to raise their voices. And it perpetuates the fiction that there is a military solution to the last century of crisis and war in Palestine and Israel. Here I want to be extremely clear. I am not saying that individual Jews or Jewish communities as Jews are responsible for the attacks on them or the dehumanization of them. We cannot and must not justify attacks on unarmed families in their homes any more than we can justify bombing, torturing, starving, imprisoning, displacing, and ethnically cleansing Palestinians from their homes. In other words, two things are true. Sorry, I flipped down. Two things are true. The Palestinian fighters who attacked unarmed Israeli Jews in their homes and the architects of the operation carried out on October 7th and 8th are responsible for their actions. These attacks were organized by the Hamas military organization, whose charter officially names Jews, not only Israel or Zionism, as part of the problem. It is also true that a devastating blockade, routine murderous military bombardments, including four full-scale campaigns between 2006 and October 6, 2023, all in the name of a state whose political, legal, and cultural pillars are rooted in Jewish supremacy on behalf of and in the name of Jews worldwide, sends a message that these policies are Jewish rather than driven by a nuclear power with one of the strongest armies in the world. And this false conflation of Jews with the Israeli state places the burden on Palestinians to constantly reject this formulation, repeatedly codified in Israeli law since 1950. The Zionist movement's claim and Israel's claim since 1948 to speak on behalf of Jews, I would argue, has made Jews less safe when it attacks Palestinians. Studies have shown that American and European Judeophobia does rise during Israeli assaults where large numbers of Palestinians have been killed. Indeed, the argument among many on the anti-Zionist Jewish left is that in Israel and Palestine, Jews can only, and in the United States and Europe, Jews can only be safe and free if Palestinians are safe and free. It is worth recalling how, since 1948, Israeli leaders have understood that Palestinian Jewish equality and Jewish solidarity with Palestinians poses one of the deepest, if not the deepest threat to the exclusive Jewish claims to Palestinian land and resources, and those leaders have thus worked to combat it. This campaign goes back to the immediate aftermath of the 1948 war. As the Israeli archives show, the minority of Palestinians who managed to remain inside Israel's armistice lines after the overwhelming majority of their relatives and compatriots were expelled, these Palestinians were ghettoized in their villages and towns, not only so that the Israeli government could more easily confiscate their lands, but also to prevent them from organizing politically to counter their dispossession and to call for a return of the refugees, with a small but vocal community of Jewish political activists, many associated with the Communist Party in Israel, who opposed their government's policies. We can see this pattern through many other examples. For example, attacks on Jewish parliament or Knesset members associated with the Communist Party who were violently assaulted on the streets in the 1950s. The official ban on the Communist Party's newspaper in the occupied West Bank and the Gaza Strip after 1967, even though it was legally circulated within the pre-67 borders. The criminalization of meetings between Israeli Jewish citizens and Palestinian citizens, for that matter, opposed to Israel's occupation and aspiring to reach a political settlement rather than assuming that the only solution was a military one, the criminalization of meetings between these Israeli citizens and members of the PLO in the 1970s and 80s. More recently, we've seen the crackdown since the 2000s, the crackdown on civil and human rights organizations in Israel, staffed by both Jews and Palestinians. We've seen Jewish and Palestinian university faculty members, including those with tenure, it has been made clear to them that they can be fired for expressing support for the nonviolent BDS movement. We have seen since October 7th, the ways that Jews and mainly Palestinian faculty and hospital staff, among others, have been threatened and some terminated for calling for a ceasefire and for expressing their opposition to the indiscriminate bombing and murder of Palestinians in Gaza in the West Bank, expressing empathy for Palestinians in Gaza and who have been starved and uprooted. We've seen how Israeli police have been arresting also and placing travel restrictions on Jewish solidarity activists, including the network of Rabbis for Human Rights, who have been trying to continue their longstanding work in the West Bank to fend off settler and military expulsions of Palestinian farmers, and to help Palestinians physically protect themselves as they try to harvest their crop. And most recently, we have seen the ways in which Israeli authorities did everything they could through everything at the wall to prevent a simple solidarity meeting in Haifa between Jewish and Palestinian citizens. Thankfully, the activists prevailed in that case. My point here is that attacks on Palestinians and their allies only fuels despair and dehumanizes everyone, including Jews. By contrast, Jewish solidarity activities in this country and elsewhere have given many Palestinians hope that there is a way to avoid the dehumanization of everyone and to work for freedom together.
Thank you very much, Shira. This was quite valuable. We are going to, for the sake of time, I'm going to avoid niceties. So let's move to Adam. Adam is an editor of the website Mondoweiss, the awesome website Mondoweiss, which covers the Israel-Palestine conflict. He received his master's degree in Near Eastern Studies from New York University. He later served as the director of the Israel-Palestine program for the American Friends Service Committee, where he gained extensive on-the-ground experience in Israel-Palestine. In addition to Mondoweiss, Horowitz has written for The Nation, Alternate, The Huffington Post, and The Hill. He has spoken frequently on the Israel-Palestine conflict on campuses and to various organizations. Adam, the floor is yours.
Great. Thank you so much. And thank you so much for having me today. This is a real honor to be able to speak and to share the floor with this panel. So thank you so much. I'm going to talk a little more directly about the ways that we have seen since October 7th, anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism be conflated, and how this has then been instrumentalized to attack and in some cases attempt to criminalize Palestine activism here in the US. Now, partly because we have limited time, I am really going to focus primarily on the work of one organization and a few organizations, but really what I'm going to be discussing as there are too many examples to count. But where I'm going to focus today is on an organization that's already been referenced, the Anti-Defamation League, or the ADL. I imagine many people here are familiar with the ADL. For those of you who aren't, the ADL is ostensibly a civil rights organization that is involved in anti-bias education in many public schools around the United States and does some civil rights work. But also for decades, it's used this guise of being a liberal civil rights organization for anti-Palestinian advocacy. And that has never been as clear as it has been in this last month, where the ADL has been one of the leading voices, not only conflating anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism, but directly stating that anti-Zionism itself is a form of violence. And I'm going to have a few examples to share, and please bear with me as I read some sort of extended quotes, but I think they're important. The ADL's leader is someone named Jonathan Greenblatt, and he is a frequent guest on cable news shows. And on October 17th, he was being interviewed on MSNBC by Katie Huang on a report that the ADL just had put out about the surge in anti-Semitic incidents since October 7th. As has already been referenced, you look at these reports, most of what is being reported actually is pro-Palestine activism. But I want to share a quote from that interview, and I'm going to read it at length. It's not that long. But he said, "I have long said that anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism. I was wrong. Anti-Zionism is genocide. And what I mean is, if you so dehumanize Zionists, and by the way, every Jewish person is a Zionist. You may not believe in the political project of Israel, but every Saturday morning you open your prayer book and it talks about Zion. It talks about Jerusalem. Zionism is embedded in our tradition. It is fundamental to our existence." That's the end of the quote. And so this is a very important passage for two reasons. The first, which I think is obvious, is just the incredibly incendiary charge that opposing Zionism is akin to a form of catastrophic violence, that anti-Zionism is genocide. One thing that's important to say is that this was not a slip of the tongue. Just last week, on November 1st, Greenblatt was speaking to an ADL gala in Los Angeles, where he was talking about events since October 7th, and said that this period has, and this is a quote, "clarified and confirmed that fanatical anti-Zionism from the hard left is as dangerous to the Jewish community as rabid white supremacy from the extreme right. These are both radical movements. They don't advocate for a two-state solution or even a one-state solution. They want a final solution." So in this case, again, making the charge that anti-Zionism is not only genocidal, but in that quote, comparing it to the Holocaust. But to go back to that MSNBC quote, there's another reason that that quote was very important. And that is how, and it really reveals the flip side of this equation that we're talking about anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism, where the flip side of that is Zionism becomes Judaism itself. And you'll hear that in what he said when he talks about Zionism is embedded in our tradition. Zionism becomes so fundamental to what it means to be Jewish that it ultimately becomes what it means to be Jewish. And this might seem like a semantic point or obvious, but it has very important consequences to what we've been seeing play out, including possible legal ramifications. And so where I'll go next is 9 days after that MSNBC appearance, the ADL published a joint letter with an organization called the Brandeis Center. The Brandeis Center is not related to Brandeis University, but the Brandeis Center is a conservative legal organization led by someone named Kenneth Marcus, who served in the Trump administration. And this is a letter that the ADL and the Brandeis Center sent, they said, to nearly 200 colleges and universities. And in this letter, they called on, and this is a quote, to investigate the activities of your campus chapter of Students for Justice in Palestine for potential violations of the prohibition against materially supporting a foreign terrorist organization. Now, obviously, that sounds very serious. What examples do they give in this letter for what this support might constitute? The letter goes on to say, many of the organization's chapters have explicitly endorsed the actions of Hamas, which it should be noted, this letter offers no proof of, and voices an increasingly radical call for confronting and dismantling Zionism on U.S. college campuses. That last part is really the most clear example they give in this entire letter of what SJP activists are, quote unquote, accused of doing. The letter does go on to say, if the universities do not check the activities of their SJP chapters, they may be violating their Jewish students' legal rights to be free of harassment and discrimination on campus. So now, not only is anti-Zionism akin to violence, it is actually now they are positing a form of discrimination that has legal protection. What can this be referring to? And this gets into the work of the Brandeis Center, which the ADL is now promoting, obviously. The Brandeis Center has for years worked to expand Title VI of the Civil Rights Act of 1964 to include Jewish students. Now, Title VI of the Civil Rights Act is the part that protects students from discrimination based on their race, color, national origin at any federally funded post-secondary educational institution. Title VI says nothing about religion. So how does it cover Jewish students? Well, the argument that the Brandeis Center and now the ADL is making is that it covers them under their ethnic and ancestral background, by which they mean Zionism. On the materials on their website, the Brandeis Center, quote, says, anti-Semitic incidents often occur under the guise of anti-Israel sentiments. This is also why the ADL and the Brandeis Center and other pro-Israel organizations have been promoting the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance, or the IHRA's working definition of anti-Semitism, which also similarly conflates this idea of anti-Semitism, which we've talked about earlier in this panel, and anti-Zionism. Both of these organizations have actually been heavily lobbying the Biden administration to formally adopt this definition as official government policy. The Biden administration so far has not formally done that, but has incorporated it in some of its policy. Now, it goes without, well, maybe it doesn't go without saying, but the context for all of what I've been sharing is that since October 7th and all these attacks that I'm laying out on the idea of anti-Zionism and student organizing and organizations like Students for Justice in Palestine are happening at a moment where we're seeing the largest anti-war movement and anti-war protests in the United States that we've seen in the last 2 decades. And it's possible that the movement for Palestinian justice in the US right now is perhaps the strongest it has ever been in this country. So it's very clear that this idea of anti-Semitism is really being used by these pro-Israel organizations as a cudgel against this movement and trying to find a way to attack and weaken, delegitimize, and perhaps criminalize the movement for Palestinian justice. Sadly, I have to say, it does seem like it is having an impact. And I want to just finish my remarks by laying out some of those ways. This language that I've shared is being shared or has been echoed at points by the Biden administration itself. On October 20th, White House spokesperson Karine Jean-Pierre equated the movement calling for a ceasefire in Gaza with the violent white supremacists that marched in Charlottesville, Virginia in 2017. And earlier this very week, Brandeis University, which again is separate from Brandeis Center, but Brandeis University became the first university in the United States to ban its SJP chapter from campus. We reported on this yesterday. We talked to the president of that chapter, and they told us that this was done without a public investigation, and the organization had not even been told that they were under question until they received a letter from the school administration that they were banned. So while we do not know whether the advocacy of organizations like the ADL contributed to what happened at Brandeis University, it certainly seems plausible. And it also seems plausible that this might just be the beginning of using the spurious charge of anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism as a tool to stifle the growing movement for Palestinian rights in the United States. Thanks.
Thank you, Adam, for this very powerful intervention. I am now Adam based on the lower third. I'll change that. Okay. We have actually a wonderful guest with us, and I say wonderful not because of any way to diminish everyone else, but John joins us from Ireland. Is this correct? And John Reynolds is actually, his bio might take about a week to read. So I will read a part of it and will let you scroll down on the YouTube link that you have to read the rest. John Reynolds joined the School of Law in Maynooth in 2014. Prior to this, he taught at the European Inter-University Centre in Venice and the Irish Centre for Human Rights at the University of Galway, where he held the National University of Ireland E.J. Phelan Fellowship in International Law. John holds a PhD and LLM degrees in International Law from NUI Galway. John's research focuses on questions of international law in relation to colonialism, racism / apartheid, emergency and political economy. His work is informed by and engages with the insights of third world approaches to international law. John's book on empire, emergency, and international law out of Cambridge University Press in 2017 was awarded the Kevin Boyle Book Prize for Outstanding Legal Scholarship. His scholarship appears in journals such as the European Journal of International Law, Third World Quarterly, the Journal of International Criminal Justice, the Journal of Conflict and Security Law, the UCLA Law Review, the American Journal of International Law, and the Palestine Yearbook of International Law. I promise this is the last thing. He is, this is not in the bio, I'm actually saying that. He is a founding editor of the Third World Approaches to International Law Review journal and website. His work appears in a number of places, including Jadaliyya, which I noticed that Adam Horowitz' work does not. All right. John, the floor is yours. Thanks for joining us. I know it's afternoon, your time. It's all you.
Thanks, Bassem. Okay, so hopefully you can hear me okay. I know there were some issues with my camera glitching earlier, so hopefully that's not going to be a problem. I don't know what was going on with that, but in case that starts happening again, I'll trust you to maybe just put some fancy graphics on the screen instead, and you can hear my voice maybe. So thanks for that. I should say I didn't send in that bio. I guess that was pulled from the university website, but I'm sorry for the overlong introduction, but I am very happy to be with you all. These teach-ins and events are, I think, really important spaces of learning and exchanging and sharing ideas and knowledge, but also there's spaces of solidarity and refuge in these terrible times. So I'm very happy to be here. I'm, as you've alluded to, my perspective in terms of where I'm coming at and where I'm based is slightly different from the others in that I am in Europe, and so I'll speak to that a little bit. And I'm an international law scholar, and so some of what I'll say will maybe touch on more the international legal and institutional elements of that. So, Shireen has spoken very eloquently there, I think, about some of the definitional stuff and the history of Zionism and anti-Semitism and so on. There's lots of important work on Zionism's colonial origins from an anti-Zionist perspective, including Jewish anti-Zionist ideas and thinking. The idea of Zionism as colonialism was also very openly and explicitly presented by its own originators and proponents. But what I want to emphasize, I suppose, for my initial comments here, that the question of colonialism was obviously also very much conjoined with the question of racism and racial discrimination in the way that it is generally. And this was a particular emphasis of anti-Zionist analysis in the 1960s and 70s at a period where there's a lot going on in the UN and international solidarity and activism around the question of Palestine, and in a period where there's also the first or some articulations of this idea in reaction of anti-Zionism as anti-Semitism. And so the work that was being done out of the Palestine Research Center in Beirut, for example, in the 60s and 70s, and there's some really key texts there if people aren't familiar with them and interested in reading. Fayez Sayegh on Zionist colonization in Palestine in 1965, and George Jabour's settler colonialism in Southern Africa and the Middle East in 1970, both published by the Palestine Research Center, and kind of getting at this idea of Zionism as a form of racism, and analysis of some of the settler colonial logics of expulsion and erasure that had manifested prior in the Nakba and the ethnic cleansing of Palestine in 1948, and that were then subsequently manifested in the apartheid type laws that the Israeli state brought in then to discriminate against and exclude the Palestinian population. And so all of that anti-Zionist analysis that was happening at the time fed into the declaration that the United Nations General Assembly made coincidentally on this day, the 10th of November in 1975. So that's 48 years ago now. The UN declared Zionism to be a form of racism and racial discrimination. And I should say some of the work I have been doing on this, and what I'll talk about a little bit is coming from work that I've been doing with Noura Erakat, that many of you will know, and also with Darrell Lee, and the three of us did a short piece on some of these issues for the American Journal of International Law at the start of this year, which you'll find online. But Resolution 3379, as it was then, was characterizing Zionism as a form of racism, racial discrimination. It was highlighting some of the commonalities with other colonial and apartheid elements of the regimes in Southern Africa as well, and the response and the tactic adopted by Israel and the United States and others at the time in opposition to this was to characterize the resolution as inherently anti-Semitic. You had figures like Abba Eban, who, for example, who was an Israeli diplomat, worked for the World Zionist Organization before serving as Israel's ambassador to the UN and Israeli foreign minister for a number of years. He was writing in the New York Times at the time that with this development and what was going on at the UN, that the UN itself was becoming the world center of anti-Semitism, was the quote that he used. And he made this very reductive argument that we're challenging and trying to confront and deconstruct today, which but his argument was that there's no difference whatsoever between anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism. And that's the kind of claim then that echoes in the years and decades that follow, and we've can fast forward to this year and see, almost the same wording being used by Jonathan Greenblatt, who Adam mentioned, and this was actually just one of his big speeches, annual speeches at an ADL event back in May, while there was another bombardment of Gaza going on. And so I think it's just hard to keep track of everything that's been happening in the last month, but also worth remembering it's only 5 months prior to this current war on Gaza that the last round of Israeli bombardments and war on Gaza was being waged, and the position that the Anti-Defamation League, or the Apartheid Defence League, I think, as I heard Mohammed El-Kurd calling it recently, the Greenblatt's kind of very absolutist comments again that anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism, full stop. And so there's a very kind of consistent trajectory from over the last 50 years. We sometimes refer to this or hear this being referred to as the new anti-Semitism, and people might have heard that characterization that anti-Zionist articulations are the new anti-Semitism. It's of course not new. It was almost 50 years ago now that there was a book published by the Anti-Defamation League by Arnold Forster Epstein called The New Anti-Semitism, making similar claims at that point about criticism of Israel as this form of anti-Semitism. And that was in the same period that the UN resolution that I referenced was being adopted. And so that was a ban back in 1975 talking about the UN as a center of anti-Semitism, and we see more recent iterations of that. For example, 2 years ago in 2021, when the International Criminal Court said that it was going to open an investigation into the situation in Palestine, Benjamin Netanyahu at that point came out and said that this was, quote, pure anti-Semitism on the part of the International Criminal Court, even though the ICC's own statement on this was very much a both sides kind of a statement. It was in listing examples of the crimes that it might investigate now that it was opening this investigation. It listed 5 categories of war crimes committed by Israel and 6 categories of war crimes committed by Palestinian factions and armed groups. And so it was, not even in the, even if we were to accept the logic or the premise that one-sided criticism of Israel is somehow anti-Semitic. In this case, that wasn't even the case. It was a both sides kind of approach. So we see that notion of anti-Zionism as anti-Semitism being stretched to the extreme, where we have this international institution that itself has been widely criticized for being too conservative and way too lenient on imperial powers, it's adopting a both sides approach to the asymmetries of the violence. Even that is unacceptable and smeared as anti-Semitic. And so when it comes to criticism of the Israeli state, for example, as institutionally racist, in the way that it was the UN resolution in the 1970s, the current guise under which the anti-Semitism allegation comes through is the IHRA definition that's being referenced, and the particular example that suggests the criticism of Israel as a racist state is by definition anti-Semitic. And we have this recent series of discussions and debates and reports about Israeli apartheid. Palestinian scholars and organizations for many decades have been talking about Israeli apartheid and the mechanics of that and how that operates through the legal system, the constitutional order under the Israeli state and the Israeli occupation. They've invariably been accused of anti-Semitism for that. In the last 2 or 3 years, we have many Jewish Israeli human rights organizations and the 2 main Western international organizations, Human Rights Watch and Amnesty International, making very definitive and clear and comprehensive studies of Israel's regime of apartheid, and the IHRA definition and all of the problems that come with it gets invoked and weaponized to attack, for example, Amnesty International as an anti-Semitic organization. And we're not just talking here about kind of local Friends of Israel, civil society groups or campus groups. We're talking about figures like the European Union's High Representative for Foreign Affairs, so the Foreign Minister basically of the European Union, Joseph Borrell, speaking in the European Parliament saying it's not appropriate to use the term apartheid in connection with the state of Israel, and associating Amnesty International's report on Israeli apartheid with anti-Semitism directly. And so it's really, I think, essential to push back against that, not to cede any ground on that kind of position or let that take hold. There's lots of examples in recent years, and particularly also in recent weeks, of these type of anti-Semitism allegations of that sort in the European context, in France, in Germany, in Austria, across Europe, some of which have been subjected to important legal challenges as well. And I'm happy to come back to that or to talk more about that as we go on. I'll leave it at that for now, but happy to talk more on some of those cases and examples as we go. Thanks.
Thank you, John, very much. I'm happy that we were able to finish somewhat on time. We have about 25 minutes or so for Q&A, and I will be asking folks to add their questions on the YouTube chat. We have a couple of questions already, but before we move to the questions, can I ask folks to here, John, Shira, Adam, Shireen, are there any comments you'd like to make before we move forward with a discussion on probably a number of topics that we have already talked about and might require some might merit some emphasis? Any last, or not last, any comments you'd like to share? I'm not sure how long I should wait. Okay, that's a good sign.
I can maybe just say one thing,
Please.
Bassem, just in response, because obviously some of the discussion and the focus there in the US context has been about, you know, some of the what Shira spoke to about the slippage between white supremacist anti-Semitism and the reality of that on one hand, and then the weaponization of anti-Semitism as a way to go after Palestine solidarity activism. And that's certainly something we've seen in the European context as well. And so where we have, you know, even where there are periods where there are worrying episodes or increases of anti-Semitism happening, a lot of the data and the studies we see, you know, 90%, 93% of reported anti-Semitic incidents or abuse or attacks are coming from the far right and from neo-fascist elements. But the legal and policy response of institutions and states has been to take the reality of rising anti-Semitism on one hand, but only associated with Palestine solidarity movements or activism and the BDS movement in particular. And we have this whole range of laws and motions across European states at regional and state level to explicitly kind of condemn BDS as itself anti-Semitic, and to take and the impact of that is to cut off any BDS or Israeli Apartheid Week events or activities from access to facilities for events, from access to official buildings, from access to funding, and so on. So there is a real serious chilling effect there, and you have this strange kind of dynamic where we have the strange alliance between the neo-fascist and right-wing parties and elements in European societies that are through the logic they have of their primary politics being an anti-migrant politics, they have this kind of affiliation or association with Zionism as an idea, with the ethno-state as the model that they want to follow, and so they have this alliance essentially with Israel and pro-Israel movements in Europe. And so it's been quite damaging or certainly quite chilling for the Palestine solidarity movements, and something that organizations like the European Legal Support Centre are doing a lot of really important work to push back against.
Thank you, John. I'm going to move to actually a few questions that have been asked on various platforms, and it seems that people would like to hear what might be, and I'm summarizing here, what would be the elevator pitch if you just have 2 or 3 minutes and somebody's accusing you of basically anti-Semitism because you're criticizing Zionism or Israel? It seems that a lot of people would like to know what would be a simple or a relatively simple response to this increasingly very dangerous accusation. If we can just feel free to jump in, and it'll be good to hear from different folks.
I'll just say two things in response to that. I think, we have to be really clear that when we're calling for freedom and equality, that does not equate to annihilation, right? So that here we have to be, as we are kind of witnessing the annihilation of the Gaza Strip and the yet another instance, and in many ways an unprecedented instance of catastrophe and the Nakba, I think we have to maintain and be really clear about the very basic fact that calling for freedom is not, and equality is not, a form of racism. So that's the first thing. The second thing is, I appreciate that people want elevator pitches, but part of I think the reason that we're gathering here today is also to say that it's really important to learn about all of these forms of racism. It's really important to know and identify the canon of anti-Semitism, its history, how it emerges, what does it mean? And essentially, this is, I think, one of the things that we have to understand about Palestine and Israel is that this entire question is the problem of Europe. Because in this piece of land, you have both the histories of Europe's internal other and Europe's external other. And I think there is I think that requires really engaging with those histories in a deep way.
Anyone else?
I would just add, I'm sorry, Shira, were you about to say something?
Go ahead.
I'll just say quickly, especially with an idea towards it being an elevator pitch, that Zionism is a political ideology. Opposing Zionism is opposing a political ideology. It is not about Jewish people. Not all Zionists are Jews. Not all Jews are Zionists. And I think that could be a short elevator ride, and you can get in those ideas.
And just to add to that, before I give the floor to Shira, Judaism is the world's first monotheistic religion. It's 4,000 years old. Zionism is a political movement that started in the 19th century. Monotheistic religion, 4,000 years old, political movement from the 19th century.
Can you say it one more time? I'm joking. Shira?
Yeah, I mean, as Shireen said, these are great comments and thoughts. As Shireen said, as a historian, I'm loath to offer elevator pitches that are not rooted in the historical record. And sometimes history takes a long time to get through. The historical record needs reading and revisiting. One thing I can think of beyond what has already been said is maybe to turn the question on its head and ask about the history of whose interests this conflation has served and whose interests it currently serves. That's kind of deflecting because it's answering a question with another set of questions. But I think that most people don't know the answers to these questions, and we can offer a pause in the conversation. And I just want to offer a personal anecdote. I don't want to make this about me, but I a few years ago I gave a talk at NYU in which and during the talk I quoted Ehud Barak, who likened the white nationalist march in Charlottesville, Virginia, to the anti-miscegenation activists, Jewish activists in Jerusalem, calling for vigilante efforts to prevent Palestinian men from dating Jewish women in Jerusalem. And this has been happening for years and years, and it's not only happening in Jerusalem. And many of the people that were active in this movement are now in positions of power in the government. But in any event, I invoked this comparison that the former prime minister of Israel made, which was and he was talking about he used the term the fascistification or something like this of Israeli society. He was, of course, out of office. And I mentioned this in my long talk about this question of what was happening in Israel and the growing violence against Palestinians. And I was talking about all kinds of things. In any event, after the talk, when I came home, I got a series of messages from different people telling me that I needed, my family should have been killed in the ovens, and it's too bad that they didn't die during the Holocaust, and I'm this huge anti-Semite. It was very graphic, some of these messages. It was really upsetting. And one person who was a former NYU professor was sending me similar messages. And I finally asked him, like, what have you read on this subject? What have you read? What scholarship have you read about these particular issues that I raised? And he wrote back and he said, to be honest, nothing. He was not a historian or a political scientist or anything like that. And it was really remarkable how when I pushed him against the wall so very gently, the emperor had no clothes. And I think sometimes it's helpful just to call people out on what they know and what they don't know, and encourage people to be more humble and to ask questions.
Thank you. Shall we move on? Let me, John, I saw you move your mouth.
Yeah, could I just add one point to that? So I mean, I
No,
do endorse.
no. We don't let Europeans talk too much these days. No, go ahead.
Thanks, Pastor. No, I mean, I'd echo everything that's being said there, and I suppose just in another way of thinking about it or wording it, the idea that it is just really important to really hammer that point that Israel doesn't represent Judaism as a faith, the views of all Jewish communities around the world, and to kind of allow that slippage to happen is really damaging for understanding the history of anti-Semitism and understanding the struggle against anti-Semitism around the world today. But as Shira said, the question of whose interest does it serve is fundamental, because the whole purpose of this is designed to silence people, to shut down debate, to make people afraid about speaking up, to try and suggest that Israel is beyond critique. And I think there is an understandable fear that a lot of people have, and we've all had it at certain points, because there are real fears that people have for real valid reasons. And so I think it is hugely important to push back against that, to feel comfortable and confident pushing back against that collectively, because the mistakes, for example, that some of in the recent context, let's say in the European political sphere, the mistakes that the left wing of the British Labour Party, or at least certain elements of it, made, was to be too apologetic to when their Palestine solidarity claims were being attacked. They backed off. They tried to compromise. They thought they could meet the other side somewhere halfway, and they just kept getting pushed further and further out, and to the point that there's been this purge now of the party. And it's and we see it no matter how far, see it time and time again, no matter how far you try to bend to accommodate or compromise or tone down your critique, it will never be enough. And with some of, just to Shireen's point about the emphasizing and making clear that a call for freedom and a call for equality in no way equates to a call for annihilation. A lot of this has come up again recently with the debates about the river, from the river to the sea slogan. And even in cases where the people have couldn't have been clearer in their articulation and making the wording of it clear. Andy MacDonald is a British Labour Party member of Parliament. He used it in a way, he spoke in very clear terms, saying, and his quote was, "We won't rest until we have justice, until all people, Israelis and Palestinians, between the river and the sea can live in peaceful liberty. And so he's made clear, as clear as could possibly be, that this is not a call for any kind of displacement or expulsion or annihilation, that this is about all people in that space. And even still, he's been suspended from the party for making that comment, just because it had that phrase contained in it.
Thank you. There's a question about if anyone would like to take it. There is clearly a serious opposition, actually one of the most vociferous oppositions in the world to the policies of Israel are actually, or often come from Israeli Jews themselves, often living in Israel. And the question is, how do these individuals deal with the claim that they are anti-Semitic? Or does the actual question answer itself?
I think that more often than not, they're accused of being. Oh,
Siri, why is Siri stop?
There's nothing playing.
I know, it's the other guy, the gal. All right, never mind. Sorry, Siri was answering my question, which is okay. Siri, please go away. No, please go away. Do you support Hamas, Siri? Okay. All right. I'm sorry if did you guys hear Siri talk? Answer the question. You didn't. Oh, all right. So people think I'm crazy. Siri was actually answering my question on. So you want to pass? Okay, let's pass. Let's move to the question that is asked several times here, and that is the idea
I
of.
think Shira was starting to respond, Bassam, to the
Shira, I'm
question you
sorry.
asked.
I am
Yeah.
really sorry. I was distracted by Siri.
that's okay. No worries. Yeah, I actually want to say something about the From the River to the Sea and the PLO's position
That's the
on.
question. Yes. Yeah. That's the next question.
Okay, great. So I did a little bit of a dive into this a few days ago when I was asked to participate in this event, and I want to be clear about a few things in the historical record. Speaking of the historical record, in the early years of the PLO, between 1964 and early 1960, when the PLO was founded by the Arab League as a way to constrain Palestinian independent political activity, and 1969, which was early 1969, which was less than 7 months after the 1967 war, and only a few months after the PLO, Palestinian organizations took over the PLO from the Arab League. During that period, there were two different political positions of the PLO on the future of the Jews who had come to Palestine since after 1917 and after 1947. In 1964, when the PLO was founded by the Arab League, the position of the PLO was that Jews who had come after 1947 would, let me just look at my email so I don't mess this up, that Jews after 1947, who had come to Israel after 1947, regardless of their political position or of the loyalty they would proclaim to the Palestinian state, they would offer the Palestinian state, would have to leave the country. And in 1968, the charter changed and became more regressive, saying that Jews who came after 1917, regardless of their peaceful intentions or loyalty or political positions, would have to return to their homes. Now, this did not go well. This was not well received by Israeli Jews. Many of the citizens of Israel were Holocaust survivors, and the rest of the Jewish population understood the gravity of the Holocaust. And the Israeli government this made it very easy for the Israeli government to continue to demonize Palestinian political claims, because, of course, where were Jews supposed to return to if they had come from Europe as Holocaust survivors, or the Arab world from which their lives had been basically made impossible, or they were made largely impossible, and people had no choice but, to a large extent, but to go to Israel after the rise of Zionism, and particularly in the 1930s and 40s. 2 points about this, 3 points. Number one, this position, the PLO never called for the annihilation of the Jews who had come to Palestine. Number two, the PLO changed its position within 7 months of the 1967 war and within a few months of the Palestinian takeover of the PLO to be a position of to support a position of a secular democratic state in which all Jews who were in the country would be welcome to participate in the life of the country and to be full citizens as long as they renounced the pillars of Jewish privilege and supremacy, and as long as they renounced Zionism, essentially. So this is a political position rather than a racial one. Even the positions before that were based on politics, but they were not received well for good reason. But this position of the PLO, regardless of the changes, gave the Israeli government an excuse and a good basis on which to justify demonizing Palestinian political claims and to shut down the conversation altogether. And I want to just add, on the part of Zionism, Zionist leaders have never offered any formulation about Palestinian Arab place in the society from the river to the sea that was not a zero-sum game. In other words, Zionism has never offered an inclusivist approach to law or society or land, unlike the PLO in 1970. And the PLO's position shifted to adopt a two-state position in 1988, and that's a different story. But I just want to mention that history both to acknowledge why people were genuinely frightened by the early positions of the PLO and how that changed, and also the ways in which this fear was weaponized to shut down Palestinian-Israeli political negotiations. And that's it.
Thank you, Shira. Any takes on this question, which actually a few people are saying that it has been weaponized in ways that made actually some, and I'm trying to collate the tenor of various comments, made some think should we, according to one question, should this statement be abandoned strategically, even if it is not what it is assumed to be? This is a roundabout way to talk about the actual phrase and answering that question about strategic abandonment, even though we have heard and read and seen how the ADL addressed this phrase in 2021, and there was nothing about anti-Semitism in the ADL's treatment of this phrase just 2 years ago. And all of a sudden today, it is basically, if it's uttered, it is considered an absolute confirmation that somebody's anti-Semitic and even genocidal and so on. So anyone else can address? Go ahead.
Me again, or John?
Whatever, because you have, I know you do have to leave, so please feel free to start.
I'm still going, actually. I feel like it's very important. Some of these questions are very important. Let me just offer something quick. So I would say for at least 3 reasons we should not give up this slogan. Number one, Israel controls the territory now between the river and the sea. There is no doubt that this is a one regime state, and we know that the PA is a proxy for Israel, and we're living in the reality that we're living in. Number two, Israeli officials and politicians have claimed, and now all claim, Israeli law through the nation state law, that Jews are the only people with the right to self-determination between the river and the sea. So there's that. And the third reason why we shouldn't give up this slogan is the aspirational reason and the political reason that Shireen invoked, which was that today Palestinians and their allies are calling for equality and freedom for all. And that means from Gaza to the West Bank and from the sea to the river. And we need to support equality. If we want it at home, why should we abandon that position overseas? This is what the majority of Palestinians are calling for, and this is what the majority of, not the majority of Jews, but certainly this is what is being called for by Jews who are allies of the Palestinian people. And we can't have a double standard. It's just, it doesn't work. And a military solution hasn't worked. So we need to think about this seriously and think about whether we want to be applying double standards for the ways that we want to live in our own homes and our own communities and the ways we expect people to live elsewhere.
Thanks, Shira. Adam, you had started to speak. Thanks, Shira. And if you must leave, Shira, we understand because you have a familial pickup. So thank you so much. If I don't get a chance to say that before you leave, for everything that you have shared with us.
Thanks.
Yeah, I think it was John. John was about to say something.
Okay, sorry, John, and then Adam.
Yeah, I can go. Or do you want to go ahead, Adam? Yeah, so I can maybe add to, I think Shira's expressed it very eloquently there. I'd absolutely agree with her answer and also with the three reasons. I could add two more reasons. One is a kind of a legal tactical one, and one is a more trivial one. But again, just to the point about not ceding ground. No matter what I was saying earlier, if the movements were to give up this phrase for strategic reasons, again, whatever is adopted in its place is going to then be similarly attacked or undermined. And so I think it's important very much to stand the ground there. It's there are really good aspirational qualities to the slogan. Shira's emphasized them in her reasoning there. The other part of that is that I think there is a solid grounds to defend it, and it can be defended where it is challenged or even prohibited. In recently, just a couple of months ago, in the Dutch courts at the Court of Appeal, there was a challenge, attempt to prosecute Palestine activists from a couple of years ago, from the time of the Unity Intifada, and for their use of from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. They were defended by the court, and there was legal protection given to the phrase on free speech grounds. The courts there said that the slogan is subject to interpretation. It obviously relates to the state of Israel, but it does not relate to Jews because of their race or religion, and so therefore can't be construed as anti-Semitic as such, and so has to be defended on free speech grounds. And so that's a precedent I think that can be followed legally elsewhere. We have had other cases in Europe, including at the European Court of Human Rights, where some of the anti-boycott bans and criminalizations have been overturned or overruled as violations of free speech, and there has been a right to boycott confirmed by the European Court of Human Rights that says any anti-BDS legislation is in breach of human rights. And then the second, more trivial reason is just that it's a great slogan to have on a march, and I think it was many people have pointed this out, but I'll attribute it to our friend Darrell Lee, who said, it's part of the value of it is that it's one of the few slogans that rhymes both in English and in Arabic, and it is a banger of a slogan. And so I think that's also a good reason as well.
Thank you, Adam.
I don't have anything to add to what's been said.
Shireen? All right. So there are a few other questions, and I would like to ask about there are a couple of questions that address basically the development of Zionism outside Israel, in various governments and states outside Israel, and the questions basically relate to how did this happen and why did this happen? Why does this movement have this resonance outside Israel, especially in certain countries?
Okay, well, that's another teach-in, I think. I think folks are asking for another elevator pitch on Zionism, and as a good historian, I'll say read a book. So first, I'll say I think it's really important that people have a sense of Zionism's multiplicity as a set of ideologies. And in that sense, I think it's really important to understand the difference between labor Zionism, revisionist Zionism, cultural Zionism, all of those differing, especially before 1948, all of those different strands. After 1948, and particularly, I think after 1967, the way that Zionism is taken up as an ideological, in the United States, I think it's a very important story, particularly after 1967, connections to the budding neoconservative movement, the evangelical right, and multiple different kinds of ideological parallels and coherence. So again, I think this is a broad question, and that we ought always to assume complexity as we approach how to think about the present.
Adam?
Yeah, I don't actually, sort of similar to what Shireen was saying, that is such a big topic. I'm not actually even sure what to share about it right now, except that I certainly agree with the general sort of timeline that Shireen was sharing. And I mean, one thing that I will say too, that I mean, and again, like I actually kind of want to know more in that question and what exactly it is referring to. But one of the things that we have been seeing since October 7th, for sure, is that what's happening in Gaza right now is clearly a joint Israeli-US assault. That this is as much a US war as it is an Israeli war. And so as the United States has adopted Zionism, and that history certainly spans since 1948, changed after 67, the geopolitics of Zionism is so intimately tied into the geopolitics of the United States and it becoming a global hegemon that we see, and this was seen in things like the Abraham Accords, that as countries want access to the United States, they adopt Zionism as one of the ways to do that. And so there are all sorts of different calculations, and I mean, who knows what's in people's hearts, but there's a power equation where Zionism has become associated with the most powerful country in the world, or one of them. And so that is one of those explanations for why you see Zionism sprouting up in certain ways, why you see a country like India. I was talking to a reporter from India earlier today. India, over the course of its history, especially since 1947, was initially an explicitly anti-Zionist country. That is no longer the case, at least under the Modi government. India is, I would say a Zionist supporter at this point, and so there's so many questions for like why states are making the decisions that they're making. But I think ultimately it is the US role, and one of the points of what makes our work in the United States so important in terms of raising these questions, undermining these power structures, because it really does have global ramifications.
Thank you. Let me just,
Sorry,
because
could I just add one
go
thing,
ahead, Shireen.
which is that I also think it's important for folks to kind of distinguish between Zionism ideologically and support of the Israeli state and the Israeli government. Sometimes those things might be overlapping, and sometimes they might not be. And so I think that the questions in front of us are always attempting binaries that fail to capture the complexities on the ground, right? So as Adam said, right, not all Jewish people are Zionists. Not all Zionists are Jewish people. And so I think that you really have to break down those categories. I saw a question on the history of particularly U.S. institutionalism and U.S. institutions and education institutions, and I wanted to
Yeah.
gesture to a film called Israelism, which actually takes up this question, right, Adam? Um, in a really grounded way. So I'll stop there.
A few people are asking about resources, and there are various levels, of course. There are books, peer-reviewed articles, and publications that operate daily and weekly. I'll just mention a couple that are actually connected with us and sort of organic to this conversation. We have addressed Jadaliyya, which is how people are accessing this to begin with, but also there's our partner or friend, Adam, who runs Mondowise, and there's of course merip.org, with which many of us were affiliated. These are sort of quicker publications that you can access daily and have a remarkable archive. I'll stop here and ask you if you would like, any of you, if you would like to share any other resources for people to learn more about the topics we're addressing today and the broader Palestine question, given that we only have a couple more minutes. There are other questions. I apologize. There's no way to get to everything. And I think people on YouTube assume that these are the only questions we're getting. We're getting them on several platforms, and I'm trying to coordinate to the best of my ability. So please feel free to share any other resources you think people might find useful. And let me also say that on Palestine in Context, which is basically PalestineInContext.org, which I'm going to put up here. Ooh, it's so big. That didn't come out right anyway. So there it is, PalestineInContext.org. You will be able to find in a short period a very large but categorized, which means potentially concise, resource list that you can use. But I'd like to hear from our speakers if you'd like to recommend anything in terms of resources today.
Could I give 3 quick resources that are actually not about Palestine, but about the question of anti-Semitism and the history of anti-Semitism that I think are really important for people to know?
Please.
One is a book called A Rumor About the Jews. It's written by an author named Stephen Bronner, and he basically gives a historical trajectory. It's a social history of the canonical anti-Semitic text, the Protocols of the Elders of Zion. This is a very important text to understand the trajectory of anti-Semitism from Judeophobia to anti-Semitism, and he does actually address the questions of Palestine and Israel. Another book that is from the perspective of a longtime leader in Jewish institutions. He's British. His name is Anthony Lerner, and he's written a book recently called "Whatever Happened to Anti-Semitism," and that's a book that gives you a very detailed historical engagement with the charge of anti-Semitism and its relationship to Zionism. Historically. There was another third thing, but it's slipping my mind now, and I'll come back to it if I remember.
Adam and John, any recommendations or quick recommendations for now?
Yeah, I have a couple that I can think of. So one, just actually, just to on what Shireen was saying, just on that kind of broader question of anti-Semitism, I'd really recommend one of Shireen's pieces with Max Eil on I think it was Zionism and the Jewish other. Some of Shireen's work on this has been some of the most valuable I've found. So I definitely recommend that. And just on to the last question about how Zionism has taken such hold. There's a very useful piece I found by Umaya Cable on compulsory Zionism, and the various ways that discourses and debates and all everyone is kind of channeled into this automatic or compulsory kind of association with Zionism. We see that in the statements from Joe Biden declaring himself a Zionist, or Liz Truss, who was the shortest living prime minister in British history and was like prime minister for I don't know 3 days or something. And within that time, one of the things that she found time to do was to go to a big Friends of Israel event and declare herself a massive Zionist. And so it's this, I think, contextualizes very well and explains this, that the hold there in terms of these kind like the I don't know if you mentioned Jadaliyya yourself, Bassam, but Jadaliyya is a brilliant resource, and these teachings, I think, if people haven't watched the previous episodes, they should definitely do that. There is for resources for teaching and for students to decolonize Palestine website and resources has some really useful stuff on it there. There's lots of others. One piece actually I would recommend as well, just trying to think through some of these issues. Recently, Mohammed El-Kurd's essay on Mondo Ice, which the title was something along the lines of the settlers stole my house, or stole my settlers stole my house. It's not my fault they're Jewish. And he, I think, really grapples in a very brave and challenging way with some of these questions we've been discussing today.
Thank you all. I will ask you for any parting words, because we really kept you here for now 90 minutes. Let me just say that one of the resources that we are offering as part of the Gaza and Context Collaborative Project, which includes almost 24 institutions now, and it's kind of growing, but we're trying to limit it so we can have a focused plan. One of the projects, or one of the resources we have, is a podcast titled "The War on Palestine," which is now happening twice a week, and it is a project or a podcast that addresses various aspects of the current war in Gaza and beyond, including the humanitarian dimension, the diplomatic dimension, the battle on the ground, the various geostrategic implications. So please feel free to check it out. It will be on Jadaliyya, but it will also be prominently featured on PalestineInContext.org, and you can find it on iTunes as well as Spotify. It is produced by Ziad Abu Rish, Noor Aliqat, and I am the host. And there is a group of researchers who are working daily to make sure that we provide a 15 to 20 minute concise wrap up. So please feel free to check it out. And finally, I would like to simply thank everybody who has joined us for the first several teach-ins. I would quickly remind people of the teach-ins that we have had. The first one was Gaza 101, where about 11 of us were addressing the current situation from various angles. The second was titled Gaza in History, which addressed the history of Gaza from the early 20th century up to the moment. The third was on the humanitarian dimension and the war on Palestine in Gaza, with human rights organizations addressing their view, which is part of a broader consensus in the human rights realm, globally speaking. And the fourth was on Gaza and geography, which was one of the favorites for so many people because it was quite detailed. It was a bit lengthy, but very resourceful. So please check that out. And this is the fifth one on anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism. We have several coming up addressing various aspects as well. And we hope to stop producing these teach-ins, because that would be a good signal that the killing has stopped, even though we will continue providing various material in various ways on various platforms. So let me ask everyone here if you would like to have any closing words. And I'll start with how we started this with Shireen, and then Adam and John.
I'll say what I said again in the beginning, which is that the call for Palestinian liberation is actually central to that call for Palestinian liberation is the fight against all forms of racism, is the fight against anti-Semitism, against anti-Blackness, against Islamophobia, against anti-Palestinian racism. We know that, again, that calling for freedom and equality is actually the only way forward.
Yeah, I'll just add, and first, thank you again so much for having me. Thank you, Jen, for mentioning Mohammed Elkar's article for Mondoweiss. That was the one thing that I would want to have shared too. And I just also want to bring some words that Mohammed shared last Saturday during the rally in Washington, D.C., when he had a chance to address the crowd. And part of his message was, now is a time for courage. Now is a time where we need people speaking up. And I think if you take one thing away from this session, because I think a lot of what we were talking about is some of the confusion and some of the arguments we might hear for why you shouldn't speak up. I hope one of the messages you got from this was, like Shireen is saying, like we're all saying, there's never a reason not to speak up for freedom, for justice, for equality. And that hopefully you take from this that you are with the world's majority in speaking up, standing up for Palestine, and nothing that we've talked about today would be a reason why you shouldn't do that.
John?
Thanks, both of you. I think you've both put that beautifully and very eloquently, so I won't repeat it, maybe in a slightly more underwhelming but practical note, because I absolutely agree it is the time for courage. But the reality is some people are being targeted or disciplined for having that courage. So just in terms of practical resources that are available in the United States, the Palestine Legal Organization, in the European context, the European Legal Support Center, these are organizations doing tireless work defending people and winning, successfully defending them, showing that it is spurious that these claims are being made that solidarity is somehow anti-Semitic. And I think that, to just echo the importance of being confident to speak up, there is support and a collective movement and teams of people willing and ready to come to your side. And as Shireen said, it is absolutely an intersectional struggle, and none of us are free until we're all free.
Thank you all. And of course, as we usually do religiously, I want to thank everyone who has contributed to everything that's been happening here on or within this project. There are a lot of people to address, including the researchers for the War on Palestine podcast and the people at the Arab Studies Institute that have been working really hard around the clock, despite finishing their undergraduate degrees, master's degrees, and PhD degrees, as well as teaching and so on. I'd like to thank Kylie Broderick, John Callas, Duna Dabbas, Reina Newsom, and Kate Greenman, who have been the ones that are helping to disseminate everything we're doing and make it out in the public, as well as Mary Kate Smith, MK Smith, and everyone else. There's no way I can share all the names right now, and all the collaborators that I always say this word and feel bad using it given the context, but all the partners that we've worked with, the 22 partners who are making this happen. Thanks to all of you, and most importantly today, thanks to Shira Robinson, Adam Horowitz, Shireen Seali, and John Reynolds for sharing with us their thoughts and helping us sometimes confirm what we know, and sometimes expand our horizons and allow us to understand new dimensions and angles of how to address something that is becoming extremely difficult and extremely dangerous, especially on university campuses where people or students can be a lot more vulnerable than so many of us who are able to respond and act. As we know, there are a lot of people today that are being arrested simply for uttering words or for being involved in actions where they were accused of something that later we found out, based on video footage, for instance, at Harvard, that was not correct, was not true. It's a very difficult situation. So I hope all of you who are following us, feel free to send us any comments and any resources and any stories you'd like us to make available to the rest of us. Thank you all so much, and hopefully we'll see you in better times.